So guys, today we're talking about the S5 Mark II. We're shooting on the S5 in honor of the new camera, and yeah, very interesting stuff. Panasonic always seemed to have this marketing strategy, at least in the last few years, of maintaining and retaining the customer base and keeping them happy that they've already got, and less so catering to new users. At least that's kind of my take on it. Obviously, every company on some level is doing a little bit of both, with every product they release. But, for years, Panasonic's biggest drawback has been that depth from defocus, autofocus technologies. I mean, it works for me in most situations, but I understand people's unwillingness to completely rely on that technology. That's about to change, apparently. There's been leaks, there's been rumors, there's been people reporting on it, and then Panasonic's own kind of promo for, I think, a January 4th event claiming a new phase of Lumix Panasonic technology. All points towards phase detection, which, of course, that means I was wrong. I predicted LiDAR or something other than phase detect. I feel like Panasonic is a little bit too proud to jump to one of those, more tried and true autofocus technology and like to pave the way. People forget how much stuff Panasonic really, started. The flippy screens on mirrorless cameras in the first place. They had the first mirrorless camera, I think, ever with interchangeable lenses, which is pretty cool. iBiz, Olympus was first, but Panasonic was soon to follow. Putting vents in their cameras with the S1H. I could go on and on about the first 4K mirrorless camera. I could literally, hopefully me and my buddy Alpaco can really tackle everything that Olympus and Panasonic kind of pioneered that is just commonplace today. But back to this, we've got phase detect. That means that my prediction was wrong, but I think they would have done those other technologies if they were viable. They probably tested them and then realized that phase detect is probably the right way to go if they're going to do some kind of hybrid autofocus, which is what we're doing. And it is hybrid. It is phase detect and contrast and depth from defocus, which, it makes sense to me. I'm thinking that it's probably going to be like DFD and contrast for single AF, and then mostly phase detect for continuous autofocus, because that's always what Panasonic struggled with, right? Was the back and forth, the continuous autofocus tracking. And I'm putting this through its paces with 24 FPS, and it's not too shabby, but it's not the best, as we all know. But it works for some people. And that's the thing. When I say Panasonic has been focusing on keeping its users, what I mean is that putting the effort into researching and developing and making phase detect work with their existing lenses and lineup is a lot of research and development. And Panasonic, being the company they are, don't have the biggest teams, the most money ever to put into these things. And so I always thought that we would be missing out on a lot of other technology that for me is more useful. Rather than putting all this effort into better autofocus, they put it into everything else, which is what they've been doing. But as I said, it's a new phase. They're trying something out. So I don't know. We'll talk about what this means for Panasonic, but let's go over a few other changes I noticed for the S5 Mark II and the S5 Mark II X. S5 IIX, I guess. So it's a little bit bigger of a camera. It's just a little bit bigger, wider, a little bit taller, decent bit thicker for that. Some other stuff that we're going to talk about. Looks cool. Looks pretty similar. To me, it feels like they're trying to fix some of the issues the S5 had. We've got a fan now in the top, which looks like it brings air in the sides and pushes it down, like by where the Lumix logo is on top. There's some leaked images that show what I think is that. There's a full-sized HDMI instead of the mini or micro or whatever the original S5 had, which was one of the few complaints people had with the camera. And I think the record limits are probably going to be gone with this fan, right? I mean, it's doing 6K now, which is pretty cool. And I think that's going to eliminate the record limits. They always said the record limits were because of the heat, and Panasonic always really tries to make their heat dissipation, overheating technology, and even their cold weather technology and resistance really good on their cameras, better than pretty much anyone besides Olympus. And that's a trend they're going to continue to bring and not sacrifice just because they're introducing phase detect. So yeah, the fan, the higher resolutions, all this stuff, the full-size HDMI, probably due to the bigger body and the fan, to be honest. I think a lot of times people use the excuse of like, oh, it's a smaller camera body, so we can't fit in all the stuff. That excuse is gone, and so is that old port. The one thing I'm not 100% sure is if there is a crop in 4K 60, frame rates higher than 4K 30. Is there going to be a crop in 4K 60? It's kind of unclear in the documents we've got so far, unless I'm missing something. And personally, that's like the one thing that I don't love about the S5, and that's why I've got a GH6 instead. So TBD on the crops and when those crops are coming in. Maybe the 6K mode has a slight crop. Maybe 4K 60 has a slight crop. There's also some open gate modes too, which I didn't really mention, but that's cool too. Being able to take advantage of the full 3x2 sensor, it's really cool for like anamorphic and social media and stuff like that. Another thing that I think currently the GH line has way up on the S line, or even, honestly, most other cameras, Blackmagic, Sony, almost nothing besides Fuji and maybe some of the newest Sonys can do open gate, which I really love for the highest resolution and the framing options, anamorphic, social media, all that stuff. So yeah, it's an exciting announcement. It means Panasonic's going to be more competitive in the marketplace. They're not going to go just for, the ultra cinema manual focus guys. Now that the autofocus is usable, it's not going to be as good as Sony or Canon, most likely, but it might be better than Fuji, so maybe some frustrated Fuji people are going to come over, or maybe some people that really love the video features but just couldn't quite get behind the autofocus are going to come back from Canon, taking away third-party lenses, or Sony having some of these other issues with their cameras, the histograms and waveforms disappearing, or the IBIS still just not quite working that well. Like even the FX30 IBIS is kind of like not that great for an APS-C camera. So there's a lot of reasons to come back to Panasonic, and with the barrier to entry of that really shaky autofocus, or at least autofocus people didn't really know how to use correctly, I think that's going to be, it's going to entice some people, and it's going to prevent other people from leaving a lot longer if it's halfway decent, which I'm going to assume it usually is. Panasonic does not have a track record putting out cameras that aren't ready, or putting out a new technology that has issues. Yeah, that's just not something they do. The releases are further apart, and so they spend more time on each individual release. So that's generally what I think this means for Panasonic. If you don't care about phase detect, it doesn't really matter, because it means Panasonic as a company is going to get better. It's going to have more income. It's going to have more R&D for other features and other cameras that you might like. So even if you don't care about the phase detect at all, I think it's still something to pay attention to. And if it goes well and it's successful and popular and it brings people into Panasonic and it makes Panasonic a better company, a more competitive company, that's nothing but a good thing for us Panasonic users, in my humble opinion. Something I have seen people talk about is, why the S5 though? Why not the GH6? Why not the S1H? Why not some of these other cameras in the line? And personally, I think it's a few things. I think it's, well, let's talk about the relationship to the S5 originally. So I think the S5 originally got its name because it was trying to harken back to the GH5, which was like which was like a famous camera. Really, you hear GH5, you think this guy is like a filmmaker. It was a huge camera, hugely successful camera, and harkening back to that name, I think, is nothing but a benefit for the original S5. I also hear the S5 itself was an incredibly popular camera, sold incredibly well for Panasonic, and so they probably want to ride that wave. You know, the S1H was probably a little too expensive. The S1 was probably a little too big and had a few limitations for video. And the S5 just, you know, it tended to be that sweet spot of, you know, size, weight. The kit lens was really cool. The video features were really powerful for such a cheap and small camera, relatively full frame. And then, Panasonic themselves sent out a survey to a lot of us users, including myself, asking what you liked about the camera. What would you want to see improved in this little survey? And I'm sure enough people said, autofocus. And so here we are. At least, so that's my theory on why the S5 of all the cameras that they've released is the one getting this update first. So will this come to the other full frame cameras? Will it come to the micro four thirds cameras? And I'm really torn on this one. I don't know what you guys think, but I think, making the S line homogeneous with this new sensor technology, this new phase detect, sounds like a good idea. Micro four thirds, I'm not sure. Can they pack in like dual gain sensors, dual output sensors like the GH6, and keep 25 megapixels or 20 megapixels and stack in focus, like, the phase detect mechanism, whatever you want to call it? I don't really know how that works, but I've seen people speculate that it might be just a little too much for a little micro four thirds camera to handle. I mean, you look at Olympus, they've got phase detect, but they've kind of capped out at 20 megapixels, it seems like. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Is like 5.8K and 25 megapixels something you would be willing to sacrifice for phase detect autofocus? Or does some of the features that the GH6 kind of offers, is that a little bit more beneficial, Because that's what I've heard is with the GH6, like, we might be sacrificing dynamic range, we might be sacrificing, the high resolutions to get that phase detect, which is why they just wanted a pure, like, filmmaker, cinematic, whatever. I'm just using words at this point. But, the optimal image quality from that sensor and push it as far as they can. And that's one of the reasons that they didn't include phase detect in that camera. So we'll see. I think it would be a good thing, honestly, if they can make it work with most of their lenses and keep micro four thirds competitive. I welcome the change. Again, am I going to take advantage of it or use it or run out and buy the first phase detect camera that Panasonic comes out with? Maybe, maybe not, probably not on launch day, but if that's the direction they go and the newest cameras just happen to have phase detect, I definitely will find a way to take advantage of it. And that's, I think most of the users. But again, it's bigger than the existing user base for Panasonic at this point, I think. I think it really is big picture, long term, what's going to keep the most users, what's going to bring the most users in. And I think a radical redesign of their autofocus while still keeping the good parts and the good ideas that came with DFD in contrast, while adding in some hybrid solution, which looks like obviously it's going to be phase detect. It's big. So yeah, I hope that I added something interesting to this conversation. I've been thinking about it for a while, and I had just enough people message me or, talk to me about it that I wanted to get my thoughts out there on how it came to be, what it means for Panasonic, and just my general thoughts on it. So yeah, I guess I'll take this time to also say Happy New Year. Thanks for sticking with this channel. Thanks for getting me to almost 2,000. We're so close. If you're watching this video, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe because, my S5, my Lumix content is I'm really excited for what I'm going to bring you guys in 2023. Whew. Man, it's crazy to think we're that close to this next year. But anyway, Happy New Year. Stick around. Can't wait to share some, GH6 Mythbusters, some fun lens reviews, and a lot of other ideas I've got for the channel in the new year. In fact, I'm going to go start working on that stuff now. So thank you guys for coming by. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts on the S5 Mark II and the S5ii that I barely talked about. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. Thanks for sticking with the channel. Happy New Year, and I'll see you in the next year, I guess, this time.